Okay, once we have our bracings attached to both the back and the front, and we've also got our sides done with the little kerfing, and you've sanded that flat on both faces, we're ready to get ready to glue on our front and back. I'm going to go ahead and take off, before I trace that, I'm going to take off these little blocks here. It'll be a little easier to mark this and see with these off. In order to glue our back and our front onto our sides, we need to take and mark where all the bracings line up with on the inside of here so we can get this to fit tight. If I just set that on that back right now, you can see there's a gap going on, obviously. And so we're gonna get it exactly lined up where we want, and then mark on the inside, and then that's where we're gonna be trimming our bracings. It's a good idea to actually put this inside your mold. That way it can keep the shape. With it out of the mold, sometimes it moves or twists a little bit on us, and so I'm going to put that inside my mold. And for the back, I want to make sure I'm tracing the back side here. I've labeled that back, so I'm going to have that stick out just a little bit so I can see it. Get it lined up exactly where I want it to go. Now you need to make sure that you have some overhang on all the outside. And then also we want to try to get it centered the best we can, straight. And then go ahead and just take a pencil and mark where the inside of your kerfing lines up with those bracings. We also need your little middle strip where it hits on that little head block to be trimmed. So we're going to mark all these. We'll do the same thing with our front as well, where it lines up on the front. So if we did this right, we can see all the spots we need to trim. We need to trim all this off. We need to trim that bracing, all that excess here. We'll just take a wood chisel and chisel all these extra parts off. I'm going to mark my front, and then we'll get the chisel out and do that. Now again, for the front, I'm using the other side, so I'm going to push it through the other part of the mold and get it lined up. Mark where I want. Again, trying to get overhanging on the outside all the way around. So any of these bracings that the sides are hitting, we're going to mark. Okay, so if I'm looking at my front, I just need to trim this big bracing just right where it hits here and here, this one here and here, and then on my bottom parts I've got small little parts I got to notch out as well. Trimming these bracings here, get yourself a wood chisel. If it's not very sharp, have the teacher sharpen it up for you, but we want these fairly sharp. And we got to be careful not to take off too much, or especially not to cut through the actual part of our body of our ukulele. And you're going to be wanting to be tempted to take a hammer and the chisel and just whack this thing. You got to be real careful not to take too much off. And honestly, you may not even need the mallet or hammer. If you just take your chisel and line it up right on the line where you want it to go, and I just kind of just give it a couple taps or wiggle a little bit, but we're not trying to take the whole thing off in one pass. And then we can come in at it horizontally this way and just kind of wiggle it, and it'll just shave off these little pieces. It's also a good idea maybe to clamp this down to the bench so you're not tempted to hold this with your hand as you're chiseling, because if you slip, you could slice your finger pretty good there. You want to have both hands on the chisel when you're doing this. So I'm actually going to clamp that first, and then we'll continue getting all those cut. Again, avoid all temptation to hold your hand here as you're chiseling. So we're just going to line it up, straight up and down, just kind of wiggle it. And then you can come this way, both hands behind the chisel, and you kind of tweak the chisel upwards just a little bit as you're doing this. Just come in and tweak it just a hair. So coming in and then tweaking it up, and it usually chisels off those little pieces. But go a little bit at a time. Try not to do the whole thing all at once. You don't want to gouge into the body of that back there. Just kind of slowly chiseling. Again, keep both hands behind this chisel so you don't end up stabbing yourself. I've gotten this pretty close. You can see there's a little tiny bit of that bracing, however, it's pretty much just in line with that, and I can feel it's pretty flat, so that's probably good for that one. So you gotta be careful not to gouge into that back there. So I'm just gonna make my way around and get all these, and then again, also these parts here need to be trimmed as well. So I'm gonna show that part next here. Again, get my clamp on there, just line it up, and just kind of wiggle it back and forth, your chisel, and it'll cut in there. Putting some pressure down, and then we're just going to come in at an angle and just chisel away all the little pieces here. Again, both hands behind the chisel. Don't put a hand in front of the chisel. You're going to slice your finger if you do that. Just lining up the chisel the direction that that line is, and just whatever angle that is, and kind of wiggle it down. Give a couple taps if you need to. You know, if you use the hammer, it might be too aggressive, hitting it too hard, so just a little bit at a time. And I'm only going about halfway, removing each time as I go through this. And I go down a little bit more and come at it this way. Okay, once we've trimmed all those bracings, it'd be a good idea to just see if it fits. Again, this is the back. I'm just checking to see if that will fit on there, nice and tight everywhere. Looking to make sure there's no gaps all the way around. Just make sure it lines up inside. All that will just fit nice and tight where we've marked our bracing. If you need to, you can trim a little bit more, but if you've got it, then let's go ahead and get the front chiseled off, and then we'll get ready to glue this together. Okay, we're gonna do the same method on the front with the chisel. Again, it'd be helpful to just take a clamp and clamp this down so it doesn't move on you as you're trimming. Trim all those bracings, taking a little bit off at a time. Try not to do the whole thing all at once. Put it on here, and again, just looking inside, seeing, making sure that all those bracings line up, and it looks like we're good. I don't see any parts that still need to be trimmed. Again, you can look on the outside and make sure it comes nice and tight everywhere. No gap, and I think we're good. So we're gonna go ahead and glue it. When you're ready to glue it, we're gonna do what's called a dry fit first, where we're gonna put it together with no glue. And I've got a cardboard box just full of these little spool clamps. This is how we're actually gonna clamp it together. So get that whole box full of these. And again, we just need to check to make sure everything fits perfectly. So I've labeled this side the back, so that'll be my back. So this other part will be the front. And as you lay it on here, again, just make sure all your bracings line up. You'll probably have to squeeze your sides in a little bit if they're springing out. And just make sure it all fits. Again, with no glue, we're just gonna do this. I'm gonna line this up here. Just kind of feel where it hits. And just kind of pinch it all together. Just check to make sure we're overhanging everywhere. And then when you take these spool clamps, we're gonna start just at the top, and they just kind of come on and just spin and just tighten up, and just do a couple of them at first for your dry fit. So I'm just lining up the top where it goes, just pinching those tight, and then I'll probably get the bottom next. Just again, just making sure things are lined up right where you want them to be, nice and straight. Get our next one on here on the bottom. When you do your sides, again, just maybe pinch your sides in. I'm just gonna push those sides in nice and tight as I put on my spool clamps. One here. I need to squeeze those in. It's probably easiest to do this with another person, to have one person kind of pinching the sides in and holding it all tight while the other person tightens up the spool clamps. But I'm just taking a look here, making sure that we're nice and tight everywhere. We're lined up where we want it to be, that it's not on top of any bracings, and also that I have extra hanging over on all the sides on that. We don't want any of your side sticking out past that. I'm looking at this and I think we are pretty good. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing, but now we're going to put some glue on that, and then we'll clamp it up again. So this dry fit, you only need maybe 4 or 5 clamps, and then when we do the whole thing, we're going to line the entire thing with clamps all the way around. So I know I'm okay. I'm going to go ahead and take these off, spread some glue on those kerfings, and get it glued up. Okay, when you do this gluing, you're just going to put glue on the surface of these kerfings here, also on your little heel blocks and neck blocks, all the way around. And let's do both sides all at the same time. Again, I've labeled this side back, so I know that'll be glued with the back, and the other side's the front, so that'll come onto the front. And you don't need to put so much glue that it's going to be dripping everywhere. Just a nice thin layer of glue, and spread that glue around so it does cover that whole surface. But if you put so much glue, you're going to have a big mess dripping on the inside and the outside, and you can't really wipe it up on the inside because there's no way to get to it. So really just nice thin coverage, but making sure glue's on the entire surface. I do like to spread this around so it does get a good little nice coverage on the whole thing here. That up, we get glue over here. Okay, again, we're gonna start at the top, just get it nice and tight. Make sure everything's lined up again. That bottom part. When you do those sides, make sure you press those, pinch those sides in. Pinch those in nice and tight, and then we'll tighten up our clamps. Kind of repeating that same process we did with the dry fit. Just checking, making sure we're going to have a good tight fit everywhere. And if it looks like we're going to be good, then let's go ahead and put those spool clamps all the way around the entire thing here. And you want these as many as you can get all the way around the entire thing. Tighten them up so you get a good tight pressure everywhere. Got a couple little smaller ones that might be able to fit into a smaller gap if you need it. Okay, so we're going to leave this in those spool clamps for at least a half an hour. I would maybe even go even longer than that. Just triple check, make sure that we've got it tight everywhere. If you see any gaps anywhere or places that didn't clamp well enough, we got to take care of that before that glue's dry to make sure we're nice and tight all the way around. I think we're looking good here. Just let that dry.